This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
We are learning more now about the murder of a soldier from Chino, but investigators taking a closer look at the case say some of the details don't quite add up. Eyewitness News reporter Jessica DeNova explains why a 911 call only deepens the mystery of what happened to 21-year-old Enrique Roman Martinez.
Desperate to know what happened to 21-year-old Enrique Roman Martinez of Chino, his sister and mother go to the place where he was last seen alive.
This whole area I showed you on the map is what we searched on foot.
The Army paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne Division was camping here over Memorial Day weekend on South Core Banks, one of the islands off the coast of North Carolina. Rangers say the national park was busy over the holiday.
It's safe to assume that there were hundreds of vehicles and thousands of visitors out on the island, over the course of that weekend.
The 26-mile-long and narrow island, not an easy place to go missing, according to Ranger Nate Towring.
The geography of these islands makes it difficult for somebody to get lost for an extended period of time without some other existing problems.
But in a 911 call on Saturday, May 23rd, around 7 in the evening, one person in the group tells the dispatcher they saw Roman Martinez walk away wearing only blue shorts around midnight, nearly 19 hours earlier.
When we woke up, he was not here, and we've been looking for him all day. We were trying to find the park ranger or their offices or anything.
The host of the podcast Military Murder, Margot, gathers stories from different news outlets about military death investigations. A comment from an NPS ranger in an article is interesting to her.
He had mentioned something about the rangers bumping into the group of soldiers earlier in the day. But when I took a listen to the 911 call, I realized that it seemed like it was different from what he had said to the reporter at the time.
Towring confirms two rangers in uniform and marked vehicles made contact with the group between 1 and 2 Saturday afternoon, asking them to move their illegally parked vehicles.
And at no point during that interaction did anybody from the group mention a missing person.
The caller goes on to say the group is worried Specialist Roman Martinez was suicidal.
We might be afraid that he might have hurt himself, or we're really not sure. He wasn't diagnosed, but he did have suicidal tendencies.
This older sister says talks with her little brother changed over the last year.
He started saying that he didn't want to be there anymore, he just wanted to come home.
But says he had a lot to look forward to, his end of term in service less than a year away.
He wanted to live. We had all these plans. He was going to buy his first car out here. He was going to move in with me. He was going to want to go to school. We were going to take a trip to Japan.
The Army announcing on May 29th, partial remains washed up onto the shore of Shackleford Banks near the campsite, identifying them 1 week later as those of the missing soldier. The paratrooper's death ruled a homicide, leaving his mother devastated, asking those who last saw her son alive to remember what happened.
Acuérdense qué pasó.
Begging their mothers make their children speak.
Y las mamás de los muchachos.
Because it's unbearable to not know what happened to her son.
From WRAL.com, December 4th, 2020, a Fort Bragg paratrooper who was murdered in May had been decapitated. According to an autopsy report, Specialist Enrique Roman Martinez, 21, was killed in May while he was camping with fellow soldiers on an island at Cape Lookout National Seashore. He was from Chino, California, and was a human resource specialist in the 82nd Airborne Division's 37th Brigade Engineer Battalion on the 2nd Brigade Combat Team. The Fayetteville Observer reports the autopsy report, which is from the Division of Forensic Pathology at East Carolina University's Brody School of Medicine, lists the cause of death as homicide by undetermined means. The autopsy examined a severed head, as neither the torso nor any extremities were available, according to the report. It showed evidence of multiple chop injuries, broken jaw, cuts, and a fractured cervical spine. While decapitation is, in and of itself, universally fatal, the remainder of the body in this case was not available for examination, and therefore potential causes of death involving the torso and extremities cannot be excluded, the report said. Lieutenant Colonel Mick Burns, a division spokesman, said a $25,000 reward remains in place for information leading to the apprehension and conviction of the person or persons responsible for the murder. The FBI is helping Army investigators on the case.
So we talked about Tom and Jerry, and specifically we talked about Kenneth Rasmussen and Jeffrey Vargo and Miguel, and all of that is leading us, well, I guess people are going to want to know where that letter came from. And so that's really what the next step in the series is.
In looking that up, I found it to be just absolutely amazing that I'd never heard of this story. Had you ever heard of this story?
No, and so when you first sent information to me, I actually thought, okay, there's a popular podcast out there called Bear Brook, and the villain in Bear Brook, I mean, it's a true crime podcast. His name is Terry Rasmussen, and he went by an alias, and all this other stuff happened, and it was very complicated how they identified him. When I saw that name, I had never looked up the other case, and I was like, is this related to that somehow? Because the they were spelled differently, but the names were very similar. And then I went down this rabbit hole of perpetrator in this case. I did not go, like, you had brought it to me a different way than I normally would go after a case, and I didn't look up a lot about the victim. And honestly, when I finally did at the end of it all, there wasn't very much available about him. It was mainly, I could find stories about how the Rasmussen, the perpetrator, had sort of been in and out of the system for many, many, many years. And I was blown away by how long he got away with it all. I had never heard of the story, though.
It's crazy. I had never heard the story. And of course we've talked about lots of kind of comparison type cases. I wanted to just, comment real quick on two things. Well, first of all, the dramatic difference between Jeffrey's case and the other case. It's crazy to me how different those cases are in.
But the reason we were hunting
on July 27th, 1981, Adam Walsh disappeared from Sears in Hollywood, Florida, which it's 25 days later. Adam's body, he was missing until August 10th, about 14 days he was missing.
15 days, yeah.
So he was missing for 14 or 15 days, but they recovered his decapitated head. And essentially, both of these little boys, they were both 6 years old and they both disappeared. But Adam Walsh's case was huge. And Jeffrey Vargas's case is completely unknown.
Yeah, so these other cases go completely under the radar, but Adam Walsh's case, his name becomes a part of, well, first of all, it becomes a part of legislature in multiple places. The Adam Walsh Act and different things related to how missing children and kidnapped children or potentially abducted children are handled, they have a pretty firm foundation in the Adam Walsh case. On top of that, his father, John Walsh, is a huge name in what has become the sort of true crime industry, which is when the genre grows money legs and starts running around. We talked a little bit when we talked about Ted Bundy. We talked about stranger danger and how women and college girls and high school girls were sort of subjected to an interesting set of rules when it comes to being safe and traveling in pairs. And it's not that any of those things are wrong, but a piece of those came from, the boogeyman legend of Ted Bundy. Well, on the other hand, Adam Walsh amplified stranger danger for our generation, and it changed the way our parents did everything with us when it came to malls and bowling alleys and places that we would go with our friends, because his face made horrifying stranger abductions of little boys in public places in broad daylight real.
Right. And it completely changed the way that kids gained independence, like in a way that they weren't gaining independence because their mothers constantly watched them. And, it's funny because I actually used to have this children that are watched don't get kidnapped. That's my thought. It's pretty basic logical thought. I realize now where I got it from, why I feel that way. And there's nothing I can do at this point in my life to change that. But it is because of the Adam Walsh story that I grew up the way I did, and that I have the thoughts in my head about watching children that are in my care and custody. It all stemmed from that. I mean, that's where it started.
We have a couple of topics that we're going to cover for the holidays, but one of the things that we decided we were going to do is we were going to do several episodes on sort of what surrounded the Adam Walsh case. Theoretically, one of the biggest names in true crime and in fugitive hunting. I mean, there are multiple shows and books written about and around John Walsh. He considers and has rallied for Adam's case to be closed. And we had, I think you and I talked about 3 or 4 months ago, we decided all this stuff was kind of linking up. It'd be a good way to end the year. And there's, this miniseries and maybe one other one we wanted to do of episodes before we kicked off season 2. So we want to cover Adam Walsh because, well, we don't like to just cover things for the sake of covering them. And I won't say that we have a new opinion or a new angle on all of this, but I do think we have a different opinion than is currently accepted in the Adam Walsh case. But there's a number of theories about what happened to Adam Walsh, and one of them was just sort of pushed to the forefront by the family and the police and some private investigators, and that one was accepted and the case is considered closed, but we don't think it's the accurate answer.
Right, and this is what happened to kind of get us here was, the crazy trail of things leading up to it. But then I got my hands on a lot of the documents, a lot of the files. And from finding that, that was just like hitting a jackpot because I didn't know much about the case except the holds in society. Because it's just a thing for us. I was, that's my generation of kids, your generation of kids. Adam Walsh would just be like slightly older than us. And because of that, I know the story. I know that John Walsh started America's Most Wanted, and he, had a mission, and that mission was driven by this tragic event in his life.
There are few greater advocates for the missing than John Walsh. He is the co-founder of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, a project that grew from unimaginable loss. John, thank you so much for being here. It's such an honor to host this program with you and, of course, with Callahan. Your life's work began with the loss of your son, Adam. Take us back to that day. It's been 36 years.
Well, it was July 27th, 1981. I kissed Adam goodbye. He was 6.5 years old at the time, our only son. I was working on the project of my business career, so excited. Reve and I, that's my wife, we're still married after 45 years, still married.
Wow.
Had 3 children since then, but Adam was our first and only. And we had the American dream. We had the beautiful home in Little Hollywood, Florida, near Fort Lauderdale. I had 3 business partners. We were building that $26 million hotel, and I was the happiest guy around. And I kissed Adam goodbye that morning and never saw him again.
So your wife took him to a Sears department store. She lets him go and take a look at some video games. She's browsing, and all of a sudden, chaos.
Well, she was, I say she was the most dedicated mother. She wouldn't let Adam ride his bike on the street or sidewalk, only in the driveway. Brought him to private school every day, picked him up. So we called him the little gentleman. I had taken this little boy all over the world with me. I was traveled all the time. And she took him to the store that day. In 1981, video games were brand new. So two black boys, about 12, 13 years old, were playing two Argentine boys who barely spoke English. Adam was mesmerized by that, toy department in Sears, asked his mom, can I stay here and watch him? She said, I'm going, she wasn't browsing. She said, I'm going 3 aisles away. I'll see the top of your head. I'll be right back. Now, this is 1981. And little boys are trying to stretch out at 6.5 years old. 3 minutes, police estimate, she came back. She couldn't see the top of his head. She asked for help. In those days, Sears store paid personnel part-time, security people part-time. And there was a 17-year-old security guard, untrained that day, who in that 3-minute period came upon the boys arguing and said, you black boys out this door, you white boys out this door. When Reve came back, they refused to tell her that they had ordered Adam out of the store because they thought that there would be lawsuit problems or whatever. The Hollywood police never found, we never knew that for 27 years. So Reve went and they would not even announce Adam over the store intercom. They went, he's around somewhere, he'll find him. That's how bad it was in 81. I raced up from my office in Miami. Again, Hollywood is in Fort Lauderdale. It took 45 minutes for a black and white uniformed policeman to get there. There were no cell phones in those days. And the police station was across the street. So they didn't take missing children very serious. And when I arrived, Reve was very, so upset. She had been to the payphone 100 times, been out to the car, been inside. And I asked the cop, well, where's the SWAT team? Where are you looking for this boy? There wasn't anybody. And he looked at me and he said, hey, cowboy, slow down here. Don't like your attitude. You know, most kids walk home or they run away. I went, this is a 6.5-year-old boy. And how could you be so arrogant as to believe that this little boy knows his way home? We live 5 miles from here. He's never walked anywhere in his life. I want a detective here. I want to talk to your boss. I'm a member of this community. I support law enforcement. I know the mayor. You should be looking for this boy. Where the hell is the cavalry? I realized from day one they weren't doing the job. They had never had a missing child case. Nobody was helping us. Myself and one of my partners from Texas went and never left that police department for 2 weeks. We stayed in and out of there, went home to shower, set up our own phone tap on our phone in case somebody called the house. It was a nightmare, that search.
It was a nightmare, that search, and sadly, we know there was a tragic way that Adam's life ended. But since that time, so much has changed. And now, if a child is reported missing, in many cases, there is an instantaneous reaction.
And there wasn't back then. There were cops who said, well, depending on the age of the kid, we're going to wait 24 hours. If it's over a certain age, we're going to wait 48 hours. The first 4 hours are crucial. We didn't really start searching for him until that night where my partners went and got cash. We gave people money for the gas to go out and help us search because we thought, what if he did try to walk home and fell in a canal on a golf course? And most of the people that helped me search that night were friends of mine and people that worked for me that came to my aid. There was no organized police search. There were no Amber Alerts. There was no National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The media sort of showed up, and the search took 2 weeks. About the 7th day, the media was over it. And I got great advice from the county coroner who told me, we do not exchange information about unidentified dead. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, your son could be dead in a morgue somewhere. We do it in Florida by voluntary basis every 6 months by mail. He said, is your son in the NCIC? And I said, what the hell is that? And he said, the National Crime Information Computer. It's full of millions of cars, boats, and planes, convicted felons, and a racehorse, but no missing children, no unidentified dead. I said, I can't believe that. We put a man on the moon. You and I are going to have to call every county coroner in Florida to see if Adam's body is in the morgue. I know he's alive. Somebody good's got to have him. He said, I don't think so. He said, it's up to you. Double the reward. I said, I put $100,000 together. It's all I have. My partners, I said, at least it'll get the media back. It'll get the attention. Because guess what? There were only 3 channels in 1981, ABC, NBC, and CBS. They all turned me down. I called every one of them 10 times during the search and said, let me on, please. I need to come to New York and do this. We'll find Adam. They went, if we do it for you, we've got to do it for every other missing kid. Finally, David Hartman let me on Good Morning America 14 days. later, and that was the day we found Adam's remains. His severed head was found in a canal 140 miles north of our home.
It is still so hard to hear that detail as you recount it all these years later. I know that this launched you into your life's work, which became trying to keep other people's children safe. And you mentioned NCMEC, you mentioned Amber Alerts, you mentioned Code Adam, sex registries, sex offender registries. All of these came out of this horrible, horrible tragedy. Does it give you some measure of peace to know that in your loss, other children's lives have been spared?
I think we've saved children. We've caught people that hurt children. But I have to give the credit to my beautiful, strong wife, because while I was dying of a broken heart and lost 30 pounds, could not get that hotel open, it was way over budget. We saw our life savings and our investments of many, many people that were planning on that hotel opening evaporate. She was in our garage answering the 40,000 letters that came from strangers around the country, wishing us well, mass cards, praying for Adam, but thousands of those letters were people who had runaways, non-custodial parental abductions, people who didn't get the children in custody in the divorce, who took the children and ran away, people who were just desperate for help and trying to figure out how we figured out how to do a poster, how we launched the largest search. I was intent upon finding who got Adam and killed him, and I was going to try to figure out a way to how to kill him. I was bent on revenge. I couldn't work, I couldn't eat, and this woman said, there is nothing to help missing children. I want to do something to make sure. And she said it to me one night at the lowest point of our life. She said, we forgot who the real victim is. Adam is. We're left behind. Let's make sure he didn't die in vain.
You channeled that energy and have done some amazing things. You know, most people see you as the America's Most Wanted man and maybe didn't even know this story. John, I just want to thank you for your dedication, for your candor, for the love that you have for other children. Children are safer now because of you. Thank you.
But as far as the investigation and what actually happened and all that kind of stuff, I had never looked into any of it. And it just sort of fell in my lap. It's one of those things that, you know, I didn't even know I was interested in it until I started reading about it kind of randomly.
Well, we mentioned, like, Adam Walsh has come up in past episodes very briefly, and I don't know if you'll remember the mention or not, but we talked about, in terms of coincidences, there's a lot of interesting tidbits to that case. And like, I spoke to my mom. There's a piece of audio I'm going to use with my mom where there was an incident in a mall, which you have probably been told about at this point because of how long we've known each other, where, well, I'll let her tell that.
I do want to hear this one thing. I want to know, so this is 1981 at a shopping mall in North Carolina. I want you to tell this story.
Okay. We went to the shopping mall, and I had a baby in a stroller and a little boy who was maybe 4 years old, and we went into Eckerd's. And for whatever reason, I turned around and to check on the baby and turned back around, and my little boy was gone, just like that. He was there 1 minute and gone the next. Well, my heart dropped. I'm not kidding you. I was so upset I did not know what to do. I told my husband that I would stay there, and he needed to go back up the way we came to see if by chance he was out in the hallway somewhere. I was afraid to leave because I was afraid that he was in the store, even though we had looked everywhere in the store and couldn't find him. As my husband, I decided we both had looked, so I decided I would go with him. But I stayed at the entrance of that store, and he went up the way that we had come, and he got probably 3/4 of the way up. We had been through JCPenney that night, and he had seen something that he wanted. And I explained to him that he couldn't have it, that maybe Santa would bring it. Well, this little kid decided he was going to go back up through the mall by himself and get what he wanted and come back down where we were in Eckerd's. Oh, my word. So his daddy took him by the hand, and they took the toy back. to J.C. Penney's.
And nobody said anything to him about carrying this toy out of one store?
Nobody said a word about this child taking this huge toy through the store, out of the store, and into the mall. Nobody
and all the way
said a
to
word.
the other end of the mall, right?
Yeah.
This is a big mall, like a big shopping.
It was almost to the other end of the mall, yes.
How long did all this
was
take
on
place?
one end. The Penny's was on one end, but that child went out of the store. He must have run out, because I'm not kidding you. It was just seconds. I turned around and he was gone. And I just knew somebody had snatched him up.
Did you tell anybody?
Yes, we were in there trying to look. We talked to several salespeople that was in there, but they had not seen anything happening. So I had no clue what had happened to him.
So how long did all of this take?
I'm guessing it was probably from the time we started looking until he went headed back up there out in the mall. It was probably 15, maybe 20 minutes total that this kid was able to walk out of one store and walk all the way up through the mall by himself, go into J.C. Penney's, pick up what he wanted, and head back to where we had been.
And did you panic?
Oh, yeah, panic. Don't even begin to describe what we did. I was horrified. I was scared to death, and the whole 9 yards. It was an awful feeling, losing a child and not knowing what happened to him.
Yeah, it is. Do you remember what the toy was?
You know, I just remember it was something that was too big almost for this child to tote.
I remember the toy.
What was the toy?
It was this Chips motorcycle.
It was huge. Do you remember it being big?
Yeah. It was this Chips motorcycle, and it was, oh my. So this was Chips, the television show. It was this motorcycle toy with like a little radio control, and it was as big as my entire body.
It was big, and I was just shocked that you were able to walk out of the store and nobody has said a word. They didn't stop you.
Oh man!
You just walked right through that store and right out the door on the other end of the mall, coming back to headed back to Eckerd's, where you had come from.
I'm sending you a picture of what it was.
Oh, okay. Send it to me. I'll get up and get my iPad. I've got it on charge. It was not a fun time, son, at all.
Oh, I know it wasn't a fun time.
It was not a fun time, let me tell you. I was just beside myself because I panicked so bad.
I look at it now and I can sort of like find it slightly humorous, but it's because I know that I lived.
Oh, honey, it was not humorous back then at all.
But see, this story ties back to the Adam Walsh case. So my first exposure, I had 3 exposures to true crime as a kid. Do you know what they were?
No, I don't really.
Adam Walsh is the first one.
Okay.
The second one was, you watched this movie on television. It was actually a miniseries over 3 nights, I think. It was called The Deliberate Stranger. And it was Mark Harmon playing Ted Bundy. Do you remember that?
I want to say, yeah, I do remember that.
I watched it from behind the couch.
Oh, my.
From, like, the side of the couch. I hid, and I watched this movie. And it was about Ted Bundy. It's a terrible made-for-TV movie. But that was my second true crime experience. You know what my third one was?
It might have been Jeffrey McDonald.
It was you writing letters on behalf of Jeffrey McDonald.
I did. I wrote.
I know.
I wrote, hey, that bothered me. It bothered me to no end.
You did that for years.
It bothered me big time, and I want to tell you something. I didn't get involved in anything else after then until Brad Cooper come along. And that has worried me as much as Jeffrey McDonald.
So I watched, I traveled a lot for work, and I would watch trials when they, I remember seeing Bundy stuff in the news. I never saw that trial really until after the fact. I remember seeing OJ stuff. I was in high school. But when I was in my 30s, late 20s, early 30s, trials became a big deal to stream online starting about 2004, 2005. I watched probably 10 or 15 in a row. And Brad Cooper was maybe the fourth one or the fifth one.
Yeah.
And then we also watched Jason Young. And I had watched Raven Avaroa, because they were all down there in the North Carolina area. And they were all real similar. They all had one thing that was wrong with them. Like with Brad Cooper, it was the Google Maps.
Yeah.
With Raven Avaroa, it was the fact that he had an alibi. And with Jason Young, he had a travel thing. He was so far away.
Right.
There was no way for him to get back in time. So they all had one piece of bombshell evidence. The same thing was true with Michael Peterson. I don't know if you remember his case. That's the staircase guy.
Yeah.
He was in the same town as Raven Avaroa was. And with Michael Peterson, they had this big bombshell of the blowpoke, where it was the tool they thought they had used. But later it turned out that the guy, Dwayne, that was the SBI tech in that case, was horrible and lied about everything.
Yeah.
Dwayne,
I remember that, yes.
He's the fake blood spatter guy.
Yeah. I remember he had something to do with Greg Taylor, too, didn't he?
Yeah, Greg Taylor. That's the case I was thinking of.
Greg. That was the case, I think, that actually brought everything to light, was it not?
Yeah, that's the case where somebody finally called him out on it in a way that they had to investigate him.
Yeah.
And when they started investigating him, they just snowballed. It just kept going.
That is odd, though, that you have brought that up about Jeffrey McDonald.
I've always thought that it was something that people weren't thinking of.
I never would have given that a thought, but I never did believe that he did it.
Well, so much time that I've spent in courtrooms over the years and watching, because I've had lots of time to watch cases, and not just streaming, but seeing them live and in person. So when I get into this arena where I'm reporting on true crime or writing about true crime or talking about true crime, I feel like I can speak with a certain amount of authority on a couple of things.
Been there, done that.
Yeah. And one of those things is this. A lot of times, people really want to say, did he do it or did he not do it? And things that are weird, like whatever case you might think of that's really weird, if you just apply a twist to that statement, that is always a possibility when you have people trying to think in black and white. Black and white, if you only thought in black and white, that's a mental disorder because the world is made of gray.
Yeah.
Well, with a lot of these cases, a lot of these things that I look at, I'm trying to find the gray. If I can just find the gray. And I think you were in court one day when a judge yelled at me that it was a black and white world, and I was a gray crayon scribbling all over the lines.
Yeah.
Weren't you sitting there when she yelled at me?
I was.
So that woman yelled at me. That judge yelled at me, but she knew I was right. She knew that my little gray area that I stayed in was the right place to be, even though she yelled at me.
I can see her now sitting on the behind the, what do you call it?
Behind the bench.
Yeah.
She was shaking her hand at me.
Yeah.
But she knew I was right. She knew that the reason that I was there was to be her gray crayon that day. She just didn't like it.
Was that the one where the assistant DA wanted $200,000 bond? Yeah.
No. That was a different one. That was a different court.
Oh, okay.
that was a different county.
Okay. I get them mixed up sometimes.
Adam Walsh's case to me was one I had an opinion on. My opinion was different than it like it turned once I started reading the investigation. I didn't know this was available like it was. Like I did not know we would be able to find it and get it. Like I thought we would have a hard time tracking down information on Adam Walsh. And then when you came up with this, it's interesting because there's several theories out there where I'm going to play some audio clips along the way here of some stuff that sounds a little crackpot. And I say crackpot like conspiracy related. I'm not saying the persons are crackpot or conspiracy related, and I will be sure to disclaim that anytime I play one of those. It's just that sometimes things can sound much crazier when you're trying to explain them than they actually are. You and I both discovered that sometimes the craziest sounding things turn out to be true.
Right.
And this,
absolutely.
This is one of those cases where there were multiple serial killers circling that area that had, I don't want to say access, that's the wrong word, but like potentially had opportunity for this crime. Huge name.
And it's a little insane actually, that now, you say, I would just say that they have overzealous opinions that they're voicing as, crackpot, whatever. But I want to, mention this to you, but I feel like looking at the information as a whole is what is sort of my angle on why I think we should spend time covering this at all. It's just fascinating to me because it's so different than what I expected.
And so suddenly we find ourselves digging through mountains and mountains of papers. If you count the books and all the papers that are available, you're talking something like 25,000 pages that you have to go through in order to sort of tear the Adam Walsh case apart. And we're in 1981. And there's other major things that happened in 1981 that are worth mentioning, because one happens early in the year and one happens later in the year. One happens right in the middle of the Walsh case. It sort of trumps the coverage of the Walsh case. And you can't really talk about 1981 without talking about those events.
There are many people, I suppose, it's hard to understand, but there may be many people around the country who are just learning of the tremendous events of this day. It is now 5 minutes after 7 o'clock on the east coast of the United States. And for those of you who are at this point expecting to see our regular evening news broadcast, we will take a moment to review the events of this day. At approximately 2:30 this afternoon, President Reagan was coming out of the Washington Hilton Hotel after giving a speech to the Building Trades Council of the AFL-CIO. You will see the president come out very shortly now. This is slow motion tape of his exit from the hotel. He comes out. He waves to the crowd across the driveway. Reporters call out questions to him, as is their custom. You'll see him turn now and look toward the reporters. And now the shots. In just this second. The agent in front of the president in the blue suit is hit, falls to the ground. The president, although we didn't know it at the time, also was hit in the left side of his chest. The police, who are swarming all over one man now, are after a man who has been identified as John Warnock Hinckley. He will be arraigned later tonight. He is 25 years old, we understand now. Earlier we thought he was 22. The two men lying on the ground there. Well, now there is Agent McCarthy on the ground. Tim McCarthy. We are told that he is in good condition at the same hospital where the president is now in surgery. And our cameraman, Hank Brown, moves his camera back now once again to the melee as they move in, the police and the Secret Service agents, on the suspected assailant to subdue him and make sure that he can do no further damage. I believe the camera will move. As I say, this is slow motion, but of course it all happened within seconds after the shots rang out. 4 persons wounded, including the President of the United States. They're still struggling there with this man known as John Warnock Hinckley. He had somehow moved into an area that was reserved for the press, but he was not alone. We're told that there were other people there, other citizens. Now the man you see lying down there on the ground is Jim Brady, the president's press secretary, who was wounded in the head and is in critical condition. He, too, is undergoing surgery at George Washington Hospital. The other two persons who were hurt, the policeman from the District of Columbia, John Delahanty, is said to be in serious condition, and the agent, Tim McCarthy, is said to be in good condition. Gunfire. The Pope is shot, wounded, but not mortally. We'll have a complete report.
From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings at the Foreign Desk in London, Max Robinson at the National Desk in Chicago, and tonight from New York, Frank Reynolds.
Good evening. Now it's happened again. Less than 7 weeks ago, the President of the United States in the city of Washington. Today, the Pope in the eternal city of Rome. But now, at the end of this dreadful day, we can say this with certainty. The surgery on Pope John Paul was completed after 4 hours and 20 minutes. Hospital officials say the operation was successful. Vatican Radio says the Pope is not in serious condition. Now, for a full report, we go to our Foreign Desk in London and Peter Jennings. Peter?
Frank, it was just after 5 o'clock in Italy. John Paul was doing what we've come to call his special thing, riding through St. Peter's Square in Vatican City, reaching out to touch the children held aloft for his blessing. Suddenly, shots from the crowd. According to eyewitnesses, the Pope froze in shock for a second and then slumped to the seat of his Jeep. Our correspondent in Rome is Bill Blakemore.
The Pope had already been driving slowly through the crowd for some 15 minutes in his open Jeep, especially designed to get him as close to as many people as possible, when, passing the same point in the square for the second time, the shots were fired. John Paul slumped into the arms of his private secretary, was rushed back out of St. Peter's Square, past the stunned pilgrims and tourists who moments before had been crowding close for a touch, a word, or a smile. Eyewitnesses disagreed on the number of shots they'd heard. Lowell Newton of ABC affiliate WSYZ was one of those standing nearby.
But he went totally through the crowd, reaching over, shaking hands as he went. And as he got back to the head of the crowd, we all thought he was then going up on the papal throne. But apparently he told his driver, let's go around one more time, and this time swing out a little wider, because he did come out further into the crowd, almost to the fringes. And as he passed perhaps 3/4 of the way through that swing, and as he was doing, gesturing, waving, and leaning way over, we all heard 3 quick shots in succession. There was just an instance of silence, and then the screams from that area. We were about 50 yards from the area at the time, and the crowd swarmed over it. I did see the Pope clearly release his grip from the handrail and slump into the bottom of the vehicle, at which point the crowds just swarmed over the vehicle, and almost immediately armed guards, there hadn't been any seen previous to that, came out around the vehicle and stayed for about 10 seconds, and then the vehicle drove off. A lot of screaming and yelling going on, with the police apparently capturing a gunman or someone very near the scene.
John Paul was raised in an ambulance to the modern Vatican-owned Gemelli Hospital on the edge of Rome. In an operation lasting over 4 hours, the doctors did extensive repair work on his lower intestines. The bullet that did the most damage is reported to have passed completely through his body in the lower abdominal region. Other wounds, described as comparatively light, were suffered by John Paul on one finger of his left hand and on his right shoulder. Doctors say no vital organs were hit. Back in St. Peter's Square, security guards had detained a 23-year-old man and recovered a 9-caliber pistol from the pavement. The man, named Mehmed Ali Acha, had threatened the Pope before. We'll have more about him later in this broadcast.
Perhaps we shouldn't be shocked by this sort of thing anymore, not during a year in which one man came within inches of killing the Pope and another came equally close to killing the President of the United States. nor perhaps should we even lay claim to being surprised at today's events in Cairo. After all, only a few weeks ago, President Sadat ordered the expulsion of more than 1,000 Soviets from Egypt, among them Moscow's ambassador, because Sadat claimed the Soviets were involved in massive subversion and plots against his government. Indeed, by the most conservative estimates, Sadat ordered the arrest and detention of more than 1,500 of his domestic religious and political opponents during the past few months alone. So it was clear that trouble was brewing in Egypt, and it was painfully obvious that Anwar Sadat had many enemies at home and abroad. Nevertheless, it was a surprise. It did come as a shock, particularly since the day began so well. ABC's Doreen Kays was an eyewitness from beginning to end.
President Sadat had motorcaded to the parade site from the Defense Ministry, which was a couple of miles away. He arrived. He was dressed in a new military uniform none of us had ever seen before. This was a brand new one. He seemed to be in an upbeat mood, and it was going to be a festive parade. There was a lot of U.S. military, a lot of U.S. arms that had never been on display before, and he was very proud to be watching this. Things were progressing nicely, and the parade was almost halfway. We were halfway through the parade. There were jets roaring overhead in a very low fly path, a rather frightening one. When suddenly a grenade was thrown, it took seconds to realize that the bullets were for real. A spray of bullets aimed directly at the Egyptian president, the vice president, the defense minister, and their entourage. Utter pandemonium broke out. We got back to the reviewing stand, which was only a matter of minutes. It was just a sight of devastation. President Sadat was nowhere in sight. He had obviously been removed by helicopter immediately and taken to the hospital.
According to the official Middle East news agency, President Sadat was dead on arrival at Mahdi Military Hospital here in Cairo. According to the official medical report, Sadat was unconscious, had no pulse or heartbeat. His eyes were open and he did not respond to light. He had no movement in his body. He had 2 bullet wounds in the chest, 1 in the left temple, 1 in the neck, 2 bullet wounds in the left leg above the knee, and 1 bullet wound in the arm, and blood flowed from his mouth. Doctors failed to revive the president with blood transfusion, shock treatment, and heart surgery. The unofficial list of casualties in the assassination attack include 8 dead and 27 wounded. Among the injured are 3 American military officers and an American military contractor. The mood in Egypt tonight remains one of shock as the country begins 40 days of official mourning. Ed?
Been a great deal of speculation today about who was behind the Sadat assassination plot, and although nothing is known for certain, correspondent David Ensor has a report on some of the suspects.
It's a question that is haunting U.S. intelligence officials. Sadat's killers, they believe, were discontented Egyptians with obvious help from supporters in the military. But those Egyptians may have had foreign help. A prime Egyptian suspect is a man named Saad Eddin al-Shazli, a former Egyptian chief of staff of the military, who in 1978 established an anti-Sadat front based in Syria, a group which is in fact one of the 2 claiming to have arranged for the murder. The Shazli group has backing from Libya's Colonel Gaddafi, a sworn enemy of Sadat, as well as from Yasser Arafat of the Palestine Liberation Organization, and from Syria's President Assad. Another suspect is a man named Abdel Salam Zayat, a former deputy prime minister arrested among 1,500 others during Sadat's recent crackdown on dissent. Egypt's government newspaper said Zayat was a Soviet agent of the KGB who had recruited a group of Egyptians, codenamed the Swamp, to bring down the Sadat regime at any price. In the coming days, U.S. intelligence will prepare an assessment for President Reagan on what evidence there is of Russian or Libyan or other outside involvement. That assessment could affect future U.S. foreign policy dramatically. But officials stress Sadat's courage earned him many enemies. We may never know for sure who ordered his death. David Ensor, ABC News, Washington.
So Meg and I take those events into account. And so we take the weight of the Adam Walsh case into consideration. And we decided that the first thing we do is take a good hard look at John Walsh, just at what he means for true crime and what he means for the case itself.
If anything, it is a legend in its own time. It really is. And because of that, I feel like I've done nothing but look at the case with fresh eyes because it does have this legend aura to it. And I've never bothered looking into that case. I know all about that case. I lived that case. I lived what it was like to be a child after Adam Walsh was abducted from Sears and decapitated. I know what the story is, except guess what? I don't. And you don't. And nobody does.
Nobody does. Exactly.
And so because of that, it's interesting. I enjoy finding out this, the nitty gritty details of all these things. Like, Ted Bundy was just, he made a fascinating summer for me, really. And now with Adam Walsh, there's so much more, except there's the stigma that comes along with it that, it's been said that the case was botched and that it wasn't investigated properly. And as far as it being investigated properly, I can't really speak to that. I'm not through all of the material, but I can for certain say that it was not under investigated. And if anything, it was over investigated. And you said earlier, the original hypothesis was more than likely correct. And I feel like, okay, so as I'm going through this case, it starts in 1981, and it's not exceptionally cleared until 2008. Well, nothing really of evidentiary value, and I mean real evidentiary value, nothing changed from August 11th, 1981 until 2008 when the case was exceptionally cleared. So they basically had everything they were ever going to have the day they found Adam Walsh's head.
Right. I mean, they did a lot of work. You use the word over-investigated. I don't know that I think it was over-investigated, but what I do think is this gets hard for me.
How can you say that, though? Because, if everything they were that was worth anything for the case, they had the day they found his head. And this investigation went on for 37 years.
Oh, see, that's where you and I differ. And, I can't even speak to that right now because you and I have been having this conversation sort of out of order, trying to get it all in order. But, where I'm at right now is...
That's how the files feel. That's how they feel.
Exactly. That's what I was getting ready to say. We're doing it just like they did. And the other side of that is this case isn't closed.
It's exceptionally cleared.
It's exceptionally cleared due to the death of a suspect. I came across, I don't know how you feel about this. I came across 4 different people that, and I think how I phrased it to you was, had I decided that I loathed myself enough to be a Florida prosecutor, I would have been able to convict at least 4, possibly 5 people in this case. Right off the cuff, I could do that just looking at it all. But so you and I took an unusual approach to this, and that is, I sort of pulled this out of a group of cases that I thought we could cover for the end of the year. And I'll say this, there was a lot of source material for this, both video, audio, lots of things for us to read, but they're not necessarily all connected. It's very hard to find interviews of the suspects, and there's not much audio that's that gritty reality audio that you want.
Right, because this case is from the early 1980s.
Yeah, this case is from 1981, and
do you know what it would take to get that audio on a computer? Seriously, I mean, or on anything?
They probably have to go to Cape Canaveral and put it on a space shuttle to get it.
I'm just saying, this is right before the digital explosion where everything's instantaneously available to everyone.
Well, and so you say, like, we're having this back and forth on the over-investigated thing, and it's not that so here's what I think happened. You have, like, a real tour de force, like a force majeure in the murdered boy's father, and that's John Walsh. And he has this book that he's put out now. It's called Tears of Rage, and you and I both read it, and we read it specifically for getting a flavor for, like, his side of things. And, like, this is where we get into dicey territory really quick, and that is John Walsh became, like, this powerhouse for missing and exploited children. And we're sort of grappling with, like, how do we present him in all of this? And we've used strong language both ways, like too positive, too negative. And we're really looking for, like the goal of what we're doing right now is to figure out sort of what role he played. And the other thing that we were doing is we have been trying to prove ourselves wrong on our different theories about this case. Just to put Walsh out there really quick, you put this together and sent it over to me, and you picked out, like, the 5 biggest things, the top 5 accomplishments he had. And so the first one that you pulled is he founded the Adam Walsh Child Resource Center, which is the nonprofit organization dedicating, like, he goes around to all these different states, or he did. I don't know how that works now. And he was dedicating his time and his resources to legislative reform regarding missing and exploited children.
Correct.
And the Adam Walsh Child Resource Center merges with NCMEC, which is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And that's a huge thing. That's like a really big deal.
I agree.
He organizes this political movement that results in the Missing Children Act of 1982 and the Missing Children's Assistance Act of 1984. And one of the side effects of those two things happening was FBI, during the case for his child, it was very difficult to get the Hollywood Police Department and the FBI to cooperate and work together, and so that the FBI could come in and investigate the case. And that's really the point where he went a little crazy trying to figure out how to bridge that. And that is the result of his work, is that the FBI isn't just, like, able to come in and work on these missing children's cases and abducted children and exploited children now. They're really now the point man agency on all of those cases. They are, because of him, what Ressler's work was with the behavioral analysis units at the FBI started to focus on stranger abductions, family abductions, and cases that involve children. He helped to develop the Code Adam, and that's a procedure that's designed to train employees in retail establishments on what to do when a child is reported missing or has gone missing in the store. A version of the Amber Alert for law enforcement, but the Code Adam is more localized. It's something they did, like, on the spot when it happened. Code Adam was the procedures that was trained to, like, store managers and district store managers of all the chains you can think of, like Sears, JCPenney's. Go ahead.
It's interesting to me because, he made all that happen because on the day that his little boy disappeared, like, nobody knew what to do. Like his mother wasn't getting a lot of assistance. What is now just sort of like, well, yeah, that's what you do. The reason that I'm like, yeah, that's what you do is because John Walsh spearheaded this whole movement to create awareness in how serious a child going missing in a store could possibly be. And that's why we're all like, well, yeah, that's exactly what you do. But back then it wasn't readily apparent until this happened to him and he channeled his energy.
Right. And that's just one of the things that he does along the way that sort of make him into, he's almost like the godfather of reality true crime in a way. Like he's, or like the very patient, benevolent grandfather. Even us, even what podcasters do.
He is no, which, yes, we have gone back and forth on like how do we present John Walsh? And I would say no matter what anybody could possibly say about anything having to do with him and his son's case, he is absolutely a hero for all of us because no matter what, you can go ahead and read the next achievement that I wrote.
He spends basically 1982 through 1987 essentially on Capitol Hill and then going state to state to state to make sure that on a federal level and then on a state level that children and things where children go missing, situations where children go missing, there's a procedure in place. That is his, like, it's so focused. It's like such a focused thing. And he gets approached to become the host and essentially the creator of America's Most Wanted for Fox Television, which at the time, Fox was not yet really a network. But in
it wasn't one of the big ones, right?
Right. So in 1988, he becomes the host, and America's Most Wanted, and then later Cops, those are the two shows that sort of cement Fox as a major network. Right. And it was, America's Most Wanted was the longest running crime reality show in Fox's history, and it contributed to the capture, according to them, and what we found, to more than 1,000 fugitives.
That's correct. And that is exactly why I'm saying, like, no matter what anybody's opinion about John Walsh, positive or negative, the idea behind America's Most Wanted, it was based on John Walsh's drive to find the bad guys. And they have brought in tons of fugitives. He's probably captured or had a hand in capturing more fugitives than any other agency anywhere, I would say. I mean, because that's a lot of wanted people that they've helped apprehend. He really did. He changed the world. He changed the world for everybody, or he changed at least the United States. I mean, it does pour over, but so he is really, he's a force to be reckoned with. And you mentioned we had read his book, and that book kind of backs that up, in my opinion.
It does. And so I've been talking about this all year, so I'm going to go ahead and say it so we get it out of the way. At the same time, there's John Walsh, the real person, and then there's John Walsh, the character. And the book is written from the perspective with him and what looks to be a co-writer, ghostwriter, and a very good copy editor who are able, like, so the book itself is so well written that it's almost unbelievable. The stories that are told, like, it seems like it's too much for one person to have accomplished.
I actually didn't see it that way, because and this comes from me having grown up watching America's Most Wanted, like as it aired, not even reruns. Like every single week I watched it, and I can hear John Walsh's voice talking in reading the book. And so, so what I told you was, it was like he was telling the story. It wasn't like I was reading it. It was like in my head, I could hear him telling the story. And, you know, he's definitely a character, but I think a lot of the book is his real feelings. Now, I was a little bit confused. I was under the impression the book had been published in 2008, but when I was done reading it, and like something about it caught my attention, and I realized that the book seemed to have been perhaps written in 1996.
The original version of the book was published in 1997. The version that we have right now that we're looking at has additional material.
Okay, so it is the 2008.
Well, 2006, I think. But he kept going. Like, that's the thing about even him. In 2006, he lobbied for the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act. That was signed into law by George W. Bush. And then, even though America's Most Wanted is now gone, we have had The Hunt with John Walsh, and now we have In Pursuit of.
I just, really quick, I just wanted to, I want to point out, did you catch the date on the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act?
2007, it's the day, July 27th.
Right, it's 25 years after.
It's the 25th anniversary of Adam's disappearance.
I wanted to point it out. I made these notes, so.
Well,
but
okay,
yes,
so.
he does have new shows coming out. And actually, so I did what I thought were the top 5 accomplishments, and because he has a lot. And I do want to point out that in his opinion, one of his, what he feels like one of his greatest accomplishments is, and I was a PTA president, the National PTA Association honored him with the Father of the Year award. And he feels like that's one of his greatest accomplishments. So that's sort of an honorable mention. And I've watched In Pursuit. I didn't watch some of the shows in between because it seems like they were sort of random, and because they weren't, quite as big as America's Most Wanted. I felt like that was his really big accomplishment as far as the television goes. And I don't know that it was ever really his mission to be like this huge TV personality. So I think he would be prouder of the other accomplishments. He was especially proud of being honored as Father of the Year by the National PTA Association.
John Walsh presents an interesting dilemma as we dig into this case, and I'm noticing that I think you and I are on the same page with this. Is if you separate out John Walsh, driven man, grieving father, there is the character that the persona sort of came from the tragedy, and you can't separate them as much anymore because he doesn't let people really into his private life. And Reve, his wife, they're still together today, and they have three. How do you say that? Like he has three children after Adam.
Right. So after Adam's case, they went on to have three children, and actually, I believe in the book, Reve says that they have four children because she gave birth 4 times. And, if the situation doesn't warrant it, she doesn't get into it. But I believe that Adam was born in 1974. 1974. It was November 14th, 1974. And so his next sibling was born in 82, and then 87, I believe, and then 94. So that's sort of the span there. They have an absolutely beautiful family. Their children are grown now, of course. That's actually one of the highlights. I feel like that's a really bright spot in the whole terrible tragedy is like they did go on to, and I don't know them. I mean, of course, I don't know them, but they're this beautiful family because I imagine myself in that situation, and this would not be the result of what would happen with me in this situation.
I was just going to say, you said that this case is over-investigated, and I said, I don't necessarily think that's the case. Here's why. I do not have the most profound respect for how this investigation went down, but I can follow the paper trail. And I believe by the time we're done with several episodes on this case, I believe that using your notes and my own notes, I can point out where it went wrong. And I think the first place that it goes wrong is actually with the drive of John Walsh. Because the Hollywood Police Department, the word you used talking to me about this was they were overwhelmed with a case like this. But what it really is they were overwhelmed with the response to the case like this. And
right, yeah. I mean, that could be true, sure.
And when you've got this grieving father who himself presents as a fairly major force in all of this, you get this pressure that starts to come about early from senators and from television and other media. And by the time 83 rolls around and they start investigating a prime suspect in this case, you've had lawsuits with Sears that have come and gone. You have television movie has come out, and those things bring an unbelievable amount of pressure to a case like this. Not from the perspective of pressure to indict, but pressure to continue to investigate.
Well, and I agree with that. Yeah, I agree.
I don't think it's over-investigated, but I will say this. I've never read this many pages. And I'm not done yet. I'm on roll 3 now of all of the paperwork that you managed to find
And like
Man.
we've been checking typographical errors, and we've been checking the ordering of pages, and we've discovered some really interesting things about this case that are going to unfold. But from the John Walsh perspective, just like to wrap up what we've done on this episode, and then you can say whatever you want. From the John Walsh perspective, this case is closed.
Correct.
He says it's done. His character, led by the grieving father persona that is real, has found its monster and put that monster to bed, as far as he's concerned. And we're not 100% sure
Well,
that's the case.
and so, so this is sort of where this leg of this journey comes from. I have read the case files. These are the actual, public records files from the case. And so as I'm doing that, I have these discrepancies that are in my mind. And so I want to sort of, the very first thing I wanted to do, I wanted to get a handle on why some of these discrepancies might exist. Now, John Walsh's book, Tears of Rage, I don't know if there's additional material, but I know at the point, at least the first edition was written, like this is the only place he talks about this, because of course it's a heart-wrenching part of his life. And so he's not going to go on and on about it everywhere. And so, yes, he does advocate for missing children and children who have been abducted and that sort of thing. But like as far as putting Adam's story out from his perspective and what he went through, Tears of Rage is the only place that happens.
Lots of memories about him, how kind he was to everybody. He was the light of everybody's life, and he certainly was with mine. I waited my whole life to have that little boy.
Memories are all John Walsh has left because on July 27, 1981, 6-year-old Adam was kidnapped from a mall in Hollywood, Florida.
We're the parents of Adam Walsh, who's been missing since yesterday noon from the Hollywood Sears Mall on Hollywood Boulevard. 6.5 years.
Reve Walsh, his mother, left Adam here, right at a new video game display, while she went a few aisles away to check out a lamp that was on sale. She left him for just a moment. And in that heart-stopping moment, Adam was gone. Police were baffled. How could a little boy disappear from a crowded store in the middle of the day? The parking lot full of shoppers. The police station just across the street. Who could pull off such a crime and not leave a single clue behind? Then, 2 weeks later, a grisly discovery.
John Walsh is busy, started his mission, and he's doing everything he possibly can to ease the burden of what could potentially happen to another family with a small child who was abducted. One of the sort of pivotal things in Tears of Rage is John Walsh talks about how he and his wife, Reve, are going to New York to be on the Good Morning America show. And that Eaton, is that how do you say it? Eaton Potts?
It's Eaton Patch.
Eaton Patch. So he's a little boy who went missing in New York, and
his mom, Julie.
Right, and so she meets them, going with them, and there's another mother. I apologize, I can't remember that child. However, so John Walsh is going to New York to do this with the mindset that now he's got some people who have been through this before, and he's going to have some assistance, and he's going on Good Morning America. And when they get there, he realizes they're looking to him. They're going, we need you to get these missing kids' pictures on the show, and we don't know what to do from here. And so he realizes, because I don't view him as being chauvinistic at all, but the way it sort of came across was his wife and her, she was dressed to go to the gym after she picked up the lamps at Sears, and his wife dressed like she was going to go to the gym was not getting, she was not being taken seriously. But when the man in the corporate suit walks in the door, suddenly he's being taken seriously. And he hated the fact that he had to, he had to be that guy. And so, when he gets to New York and they're going to go on the show, he feels like he's got somebody to guide him, and he ends up having to take the ropes and go because there is no one.
Yeah, so it does come from this all comes from a time period where the mindset, like what was accepted at that time, was very chauvinistic. It's not just John Walsh. It's like a lot of things that have power attached to them come from a male perspective.
Right, and he didn't want to take that power is sort of my point. He just realized that, like, in a voice to be heard, it was going to have to be him. And so he didn't get to, like, grieve and get to be the missing child's father. He had, because, okay, so sadly, the morning that they went on the Good Morning America show, they had been notified that remains had been found, and there was a possibility that it was Adam. And so they had to decide, do we go on the show or do we go home? And
but here's what was a big deal about that. Missing kids from other places didn't go on television in New York. And even kids in New York, which is the point of Julie Patz being in there, they didn't get attention. So what they perceived was it was the man in the room in the suit. You're not wrong on that. But what it really was, one of John Walsh's strengths is he writes a good yarn as far as marketing and copy goes. Like, that was something he did all along the way before Adam came along, before Adam went missing. But the other thing is he networks to an insane degree, and he had been networking. That was ultimately the appearance on Good Morning America was the result of multiple daisy chains in his network, like being on his side, liking the Walsh family, and connecting him with the right people to hear his story. It was all very fortuitous, and it was very serendipitous. You can look at it from one perspective and think it's kind of chauvinistic. And I think people reading Tears of Rage could come away with that fairly.
But I don't think he's chauvinistic. I think he was just, if he hadn't done it, it wouldn't have gotten done. And that's not to say he was being chauvinistic. It's just the way things were then. This is 1981. But I want to point out, and this is something that really stuck with me, and I would, I feel like it would stick with anybody. So having been notified really early in the morning that, some remains had been found, and having met with Julie Patz and Eaton Potts' mom and another missing child's mother, and they had all these things they wanted them to cover on the Good Morning America show. In the event they didn't go on, that stuff was not going to happen. And so
and this kicks off so many things.
And John Walsh knows in the back of his head, you know that he's got to know that they found his son, okay? And he says, I'm going to go on and do the show. I'm doing it for all these other kids. Now, an official confirmation hadn't been made yet, but that was one of, you can say what you want about him, but that was one of the most selfless things that he could have possibly done, because that show that he went on and did, it yielded results for these other families and for these other children. And I can't tell you exactly what happened, but so he put aside, now I don't know that Reve was aware. I'm sure he kind of buffered it from her. As the day went on, it was less of a buffer, but he had this enormous amount of strength to do that, because I don't see a whole lot of parents, and rightly so, I don't see a whole lot of parents even being able to do that in that situation. And he did it. And then he went home and found out that, in fact, his child was dead.
So you call it selfless. If I was sitting in a room with Julie Patz and I think it was Kristen Cole Brown, who's own daughter had been missing, but she ran.
I know it was a missing child's parent. I just can't recall who it was.
There was an organization up there called Child Find, and I know Kristen Cole Brown ran it, and I know her daughter had been missing since the 70s. I know that that she was one of the people in the room, and so you call it selfless and coming from a position of strength. I call it swimming and treading water in grief, and being able to redirect your own opportunistic nature. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it is a thing. It's a personality trait he displays over and over again. He wants to go diving, so he builds his career around these resorts where he can couple his relaxation time with his business. He's brilliant at it.
I don't know. I don't see how that benefited him personally in any way.
Oh, I don't know that it would have. I'm saying he already had the nature to know he would not get this opportunity again.
Right,
This was
but
it.
he knew that the
chance to do this.
opportunity was over for him. In the back of his head, he knew, but he did it for people he had just met who had gone through similar situations. He did it, and the response after the show was amazing, and it was huge, and it started like this whole it was a media sensation because basically they told him after he got the call, all this is happening at like midnight and then 3 a.m. and like it was crazy. But he got the call and he said, look, whoever it was said, look, we will take you back to the airport and you can go home right now. And he said, no, we're going to do the show. I'm going to go on and I'm going to present what these other mothers have asked me to do. And, I'm going to do this. And he did. And I think it was a selfless act because he, with his child in that situation, they didn't gain anything from that.
The worst that we could have imagined happened.
Adam's head was found in a canal about 125 miles north of the mall.
We think we gave it our best effort to bring him back. I just wish it had a happier ending.
Adam evidently was too good for this world. He was much greater than this world.
What kind of a monster could commit such a wicked act?
So what I really want to make clear is that the discrepancies I'm finding and what may or may not come out of where we end up at, I'm not doing anything like to put down or disprove or try to discredit anything about the investigation, about the Walsh family, about Adam's case. Nothing. If anything, the reason I'm not going, forget this, it's a million pages, I don't want to read it, is because I have so much respect for John Walsh and his mission. And then I have so much sympathy for Reve Walsh and what, I can't even imagine what she went through and losing her little boy. But I have so much respect for John Walsh and what he did for every, possible missing child, that I feel like in the event that what has occurred it can be, factually disproven or even, proven. I mean, if it's proven, great. I feel like he deserves that. I feel like Adam deserves that. And I feel like the whole Walsh family deserves that as opposed to this exceptional clearance. Would you agree?
Absolutely. That's why I'm doing it. That's the reason I suggested the case.
So the whole thing is just, I didn't think it was going to be like this, though. I thought it was going to be, let's talk about this case that I know because I've heard it a gazillion times. And I know what happened. And I thought it would be like a quick thing. In fact, it was on a checkoff list. And that has not been what has occurred because I've literally been up to my eyeballs in this stuff.
Well, so, I'm being totally serious. I read 1,000 pages of this case,
and I knew that I was getting into repetitive territory. But within that 1,000 pages that I read, I already knew what type of abduction and homicide this was. Did you?
Of course. That's why I said, prove me wrong.
So
I knew really quick.
Next week, in all seriousness, we're talking about holdback knowledge, the Triangle Road, and statistical anomalies in the types of deaths of abducted children in the United States. Like that's literally the next episode, and that's when we're really going to meet the person who killed Adam Walsh in the story that they give you in the media. And we're going to talk about him and whether or not that's what happened.
Thanks for joining us. You can reach us at 252-365-5593 or at truecrimexcess.com or truecrimexcess@gmail.com if you want to send us a note. This episode was brought to you by labrotticreations.com. That's LABROTTIECREATIONS.com. Check out the merchandise and specifically their fun Pop Pet art custom pieces made from photos of your very own pets. Use the promo code CRIMEXS, that's CRIMEXS, for 20% off a fun, brightly colored, happy piece of art of your own pet at their site, labrotticreations.com. Music in this episode was licensed for True Crime XS. The theme song was Indestructible by Noah Smith. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform or at TeePublic, Instagram, or Twitter. You can also join us on Patreon to fund future body exploration trips. But the best thing you can do for us is leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform and share us with your friends. And we'll see you next time.
This is True Crime XS.
It would be incredibly cost prohibitive to cover Adam's case if we were, either if we were back then and somehow doing it on a radio show or a documentary or something, or just today trying to round up all the information. But one of the most fascinating aspects for me is people are still fighting for these case files. They're fighting for these case files through this year. And the case files have gotten so scattered into the wind that sometimes it starts to feel like some of it's on purpose. Like some people were ditching their case files, not like they were corrupt and hiding something in the investigation, but there's a lot of people that are, I swear, they're just giving the middle finger back to the institutions that were surrounding this investigation. That was one of the most fascinating things I've ever seen, because the sheer size of the case is the only thing that lets that happen. So many people have been reassigned over this case. I can't even count how many people got demoted or moved out of their division or shuffled around in the bureaucracy. It's bizarre, and it's all because of this little boy. And the only thing that I can describe it, so if people understand why I get into these cases and they stick with me, it's just I can see the specter of this kid sitting in the corner until I at least get to the bottom enough that I can understand the case. And that's what Meg helps with. That's where she comes in. This is one of the first cases where we're having to make sure we're right, because if we're wrong, anytime you do something like that, so you either come out and you have a feeling of satisfaction and the specter goes away, or you end up sitting there as puzzled as you were before with more information and less understanding, and it just makes you miserable. With this case, we both start to question, we can see it. Is it that the prohibitive nature of the resources involved to reinvestigate it were also what caused people to be we just have to close this out some way or another? Because that's what they did. They just close it for the sake of closing it.
In the morning
the dishes, make some coffee, hear you singing right beside me.